My name is Tanveer Bukhari. I'm a member of the Circle of Peace. It is my honor to welcome you today at this seminar. I'm sure you're waiting to hear the panelists and not myself, but I'm being also instructed to introduce our moderator today. It's going to be Professor Sarita Gallagher. She teaches at this university. Religion is her main area of focus. But I think for today's seminar, which deals with human rights and to some extent with different faiths, and we have 4 faiths represented here today, she would be an excellent moderator because of her experience in the past of teaching intercultural communication and anthropology. That all kind of like filters into human rights and what we see in our world today. As I was driving over to Newburgh from Portland, I live there, this term came to my mind, and it may have already been there, but I'll share it with you. It's the religio-cultural paradox that we basically see around us in the world. And this paradox basically drives a lot of issues that you observe in different faiths and around the world. But if you look deeper, it's not the religion which is driving those issues. Like, for example, we just had the Women's Day recently, and it's celebrated around the world. And there is discrimination in many cultural parts of the world against women, and that discrimination, we know, goes beyond just not getting a job or not getting admission into a college. It goes far beyond that. So religions may not have anything to do with that. Culture may have something to do with that. Exploitation and not providing that human rights. So without further ado, I'm going to request Dr. Gallagher to come over and take her role as a moderator, and hopefully I have a lot of questions for the panelists. I'm sure you will have a lot of questions, and we'll have a great evening. Thank you.
It's wonderful to see your shiny, happy faces here this evening. It is my honour to welcome you as well on behalf of both the Circle of Peace and George Fox University. Our presentations today are going to be, as you note, we have 4 panellists who are going to be talking about the very, very important issue of human rights from their own faith traditions. And so this evening, our structure is going to be such that we're going to have, we're going to hear a little bit from each of our panellists for about 20 minutes or so. They're going to share from their own religious texts and traditions about the issue of human rights. And then right at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I would like to introduce our panellists today. We have 4 panellists. First, we have Rabbi Joseph Wolf. And Rabbi Wolf is the rabbi at the Havurah Shalom congregation. He has been since 1987. And he has been a supporter of conflict reduction in the Middle East and has advocated for strategies to combat poverty. He has served on numerous commissions and boards in the metropolitan Portland area regarding workers' rights, healthcare, and housing issues. And in 2001, he was a co-founder of a local dialogue group which probed relationships and affinities between Jewish, Muslim, and Arab leaders in the community. And he has recently been a member of the National Board of Rabbis for Human Rights. And so it's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Wolf. So maybe we'll clap after everyone, right? So what I'll do is I'll introduce everybody first, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Rabbi Wolf. So our second panelist today is Dr. Paul Anderson. And Dr. Anderson is a professor of Biblical and Quaker Studies at George Fox University, where he has served since 1989. And he has served in pastoral and youth ministries in 6 Friends churches, and his childhood involved living in Colombia, Ecuador, and the Dominican Republic, where his father served in cultural affairs. Dr. Anderson's PhD is from the University of Glasgow, and he has written several books, including The Christology of the Fourth Gospel and the Quest for Jesus, and The Riddles of the Fourth Gospel. And his most recent book, From Crisis to Christ, provides a contextual introduction of the New Testament. So it's wonderful to have you here as well, Dr. Paul Anderson. And our third panellist this evening is Mr. Arif Humayun, who's a practicing Muslim and extensive writer on topics like Sharia, jihad, blasphemy, and apostasy, and a specialist in comparative religion. And he is dedicated to understanding what causes radicalization and in advancing human rights. Professionally, he manages a global intellectual property licensing business and is an employee of a large multinational corporation. He's also president and co-founder of Circle of Peace, which is an international initiative to strengthen the bonds of humanity and compassion across faith communities, and is also an active member of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. So it's lovely to have you here. And our final speaker this evening is Dr. Feridun Rahimi. Dr. Rahimi is a retired paediatrician who practiced in Iran, where he was also recognised as an example of medico-social development through empowering the local population for self-help. And after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, due to persecution, he and his family moved to Trinidad and Tobago, where he practiced for another 24 years. He has served on local, national, and international Baha'i institutions. And now that he's in the US, he travels throughout the US to promote spiritual education of children and youth and other religious activities, encouraged by the World Centre of the Faith. So it's wonderful to have you here as well, Dr. Rahimi. So our structure, as I mentioned before, each speaker is going to be sharing for about 20 minutes, and we don't have a formal break in between the speakers, so if you need to rush out, we have restrooms around the corner. If you need some more coffee in this evening, we have a whole bunch of coffee and snacks over there, and that's totally fine. And then after each of our speakers has shared, then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I'll hand it over to our first speaker. So let us welcome him.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Rabbi Joey Wolf, and I'm not a doctor, by the way. The only doctorate I have is a Doctor of Endurance that was given to me by my seminary for having survived 25 years, a few years ago. So I'm a real survivor now, I suppose, and that gives me some rights, but I don't want to pretend to have a PhD in the field. I've been very active in an organization for some time called Rabbis for Human Rights. And sometimes I ask myself this question, how is it possible that there's an organization called Rabbis for Human Rights? Shouldn't all rabbis be about human rights? It makes no sense on the one hand, and yet the more you might realize about the context in Jewish historical terms, human rights, maybe there is some sense to this. So on the one hand, lots and lots of Jews are involved in human rights work. They're involved as lawyers or as advocates, leaders of prominent organizations, outspoken proponents of human rights all around the world, very happy to say. On the other hand, a lot of those Jews will disclaim any connection to their religious tradition. They'll say they're culturally Jewish, but it's still interesting to me that it's part of a Jewish inheritance that they're involved in human rights. Now, one of the reasons that there's a title, Rabbis for Human Rights, the few of us who are rabbis for human rights, as opposed to the rest of the rabbis, has to do, I think, with the fact that it's only within the last century that Jews have experienced a sense of autonomy and a standing to feel safe in the world, because our history is one of marginalization. At this point, I think it's safe to say that in terms of American terms, Jews are thought of and think of themselves as white, but at one point they weren't white. We were outsiders, we were marginal. we were strangers in a strange land. And not only in terms of America, but in terms of Europe, in terms of North Africa. There were periods of time clearly that we intermeshed with local populations in very favorable ways. And yet those times were always limited. There were always times when there were rebellions, expulsions, massacres. Some historians refer to, an overemphasis on those times as something called the lachrymose version of Jewish history, where people are crying all the time. It wasn't all bad, and yet Jews were insecure. So how could they think in terms of universal human rights when they were really guarding their own rights? So our pathway to human rights really has not only been in terms of universal human rights, it's been in terms of honoring difference and recognizing that something should be prized, whether we would take it scripturally out of the 5 books of Moses or out of the Talmud, that something should be prized in the experience, in the encounter with an other, with people with difference, with a different tradition, that there's something holy in that. And so there's a big difference between entertaining a notion of universalism and saying that everybody, after all, is equal, has the same possibilities, and instead saying, I'm entertaining a conversation, a dialogue with someone whom, on this occasion right now, I should honor. 2 prominent modern philosophers, modern and postmodern, who you might want to look at, who talk about that, are Martin Buber, who's very prominent, of course, in Jewish and Christian thinking, talked about the I-thou relationship, what comes out of that relationship with an other immediately, right now, that you come into something wholly different, and in that relationship you discover the divine. Another one is Emmanuel Levinas, most recently, who talked about notions of alterity, otherness. It's easy for me to tell you that in the 5 books of Moses, there are many, many verses. And I tend to find out that in Christian audiences, you could tell me the chapter and verse better than Jews can. I could tell you the words in Hebrew, but I couldn't tell you where they are, usually. But you know these verses. You know that we can learn about the other from verses relating to leaving aside a corner of the field for people to pick up who are less privileged than you may be, putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. You're not supposed to do that. Jews learned that related to laws of fraudulence and overreaching in business, wage theft. We learn right out of the Torah. Whenever I say the Torah, it's 5 books of Moses. By the way, Torah does not mean law. Torah is teaching. That's all it means in Hebrew. Not standing idly by the blood of your neighbor. You know these verses. Loving your neighbor as you want self. There's a very important verse, I think, that gets overlooked, where the scenario in Deuteronomy where we come upon a corpse, a dead body, and it's against we're outraged that nobody is taking responsibility or feeling accountable for someone who has died, and there are laws related to who needs to take control and responsibility, giving the chance to a city that's besieged to make peace. These are the kinds of laws that we, of course, can draw a field of reference to for human rights. But I would be pretending if I said to you that Jews always learned human rights, universal principles from these verses. They did not, because they were living in fear and on the run. So they learned from these verses about how best to take care of the people within their own domain. At least they had some measure of control that they tried to assert to operate in a community. One clear teaching that's part of our best holiday. I'll say it's the best holiday because it's Passover. It's Pesach in Hebrew. It's such an incredible holiday because it does teach us, really, some fundamental ideas about human rights that we could extrapolate to the broader, to the globe today. We are called upon, we're obligated to see ourselves, it says in the Talmud, as if each one of us came forth from Egypt. And, how do you do that? You're obligated by law to see yourself as if you came forth from Egypt? How do you do it? Is it symbolic? Or are you supposed to discover in your life what's going on? You know, I live in Southwest Portland. I'm supposed to figure out what it means right now that I'm just coming forth from Egypt. Where are the other strangers? Who's on the run? Who's escaping in the middle of the night? Who doesn't have a home? Who doesn't have a place? These are critical teachings that we can expand upon, and we have an opportunity now to do that. Of course, you probably know that the Talmud pointed out, and you point out as well in your traditions, that certainly in the Bible, there are any number of, there are all different countings assigned to how many times it's said that you have to treat the stranger well, right? And you're supposed to know the soul of the stranger, or the heart of the stranger. And actually one commentary says, you're supposed to know the heart of the stranger, which means if let's just say today, an undocumented worker goes into a court, that undocumented worker should not feel forlorn and despairing that she will not have advocacy in that court. You're supposed to go and stand up and say, you have a right to justice just like anybody else. You may be right, you might be wrong, but you have standing in a court of law. That's what it means to know the heart of a stranger. We can extrapolate universal principles, and that's a new thing. Okay. Of course, the most important touchstone in Torah for us, for human rights, is that we learn in the book of Genesis that we're made in the image of God. What's more, we're made in the image of God, and in the same verse it says male and female, right? So each one of us has a glorious, expansive range of expression that is extra gender. In other words, opens the field of possibilities, and that people should see the splendor of being human as a divine opportunity, okay? Now, here's the challenge. And how am I doing for time? Where's that? I'm okay? Here's the big challenge. I used to think that in this era, we were coming into a period of time when human rights would really be ascendant. And the reason for that is something that this crew in here knows very well. It's called the internet. The idea that people were reporting, and you're just used to it. You take it for granted that people report about everything in an open source way. They report about all of the stories, really, the narratives of people all around the world. And so it's new. I mean, in the last 20, 25 years that people can hear about people on the other side of the globe and recognize in their stories and in their music and in their art, in their travails and in their aspirations, something that we can empathize with. That's a really positive thing for human rights. And so I used to think that that was a good sign for human rights. But now, you know what? I'm realizing that we're also entering a period of time. There is a historian, his name is Yuval Noah Harari, he happens to be Israeli, totally secular. Has nothing to do with the fact that, you know, most of the Jews in Israel are not religiously involved. He's a macro historian. And he warns us that as we move increasingly into a high-tech era, into an era of computing, into an era of artificial intelligence, the premium is going to be on intelligence and not consciousness. And that people increasingly, due to scarcities and gaps, inequality gaps, people are going to be made to be expendable because they don't necessarily participate in the high-tech society and culture. And so they're going to be outside, and they're going to be left by the wayside. And increasingly, if you read novels, some of you, I hope you do read novels, especially dystopian novels, you'll find that in a lot of novels, there are people outside the closed gates of society, people who are made expendable. So if you think of Cormac McCarthy, The Road, or Sheng-Ri Lee on Such a Full Sea, or Atticus Lish, Preparation for the Next Life, or Daniel Alarcon, Lost City Radio, Yu Li, she writes about the vagrants. People people who are describing a world in which some are in and many are left out. We know about the disparities that are increasing, and due to climate change, of course, there are many more scarcities around the world, and people are emigrating from where they lived, and they're on the fringes of society. So on the one hand, you've got a human rights society because people are listening to stories. On the other hand, you've got vast inequalities. And according to this historian, he's saying that in the 21st century, increasingly, people are going to be left out. It's not going to be an era of the masses, but only of the few. So what I'd like to close with is the idea that if we as religious people are going to offer anything to human society as we move further into the 21st century, it's going to be this notion of operating along the lines that we are created in the divine image. And that's about consciousness. It's about what humanity really is all about. And that's not just intelligence. That's not just computing. It's not just technology. It's about being good and noble. And I would close by saying that in a world that is increasingly virtual, what we can represent as religious folks, as teachers, as people who offer kindness and gratitude and reflection, will have more and more to do, not with the virtual, but with virtue. Okay? Thanks.
Could I have some help? Pass these out for me. Thank you. Yeah, can you help me display that? There you go. Hey, thanks. Thank you so much. Wonderful. One of the things we do here at George Fox is to teach Bible, Hebrew Scripture, and Christian Scripture to all of our students. We want our students to get biblically informed, at least on a basic level, their first semester, their first year here at George Fox, and then to take a second course also. And so it's really good to be reminded of some of those basic teachings about human rights that are certainly within Hebrew Scripture. My name is Paul Anderson, and I teach New Testament and Quaker Studies, spirituality, a few other things. One of the things that I find myself thinking about is how Christians have approached issues of human rights. And as a Quaker, I find myself wanting to go in the direction, well, here's how Quakers have done this. But that would be too narrow. And so part of what I'd like to do is just to develop some of these bases for human rights in looking at Christian Scripture, especially in the work of Jesus and also in the work of, let's see. Sarita, I'm not getting this to advance. Is it just...
Just turn it on.
There we go. Turning it on helps. There we go. And sometimes it doesn't help, Sarita. Is there a thing that's plugged in? There we go. All right, thanks. Right, so thinking about how this works its way out in the teachings of Jesus, and then also in the mission of Paul, and then an understanding of God's reign that transcends any particular group as well as religion. So that's where I'd like to go with our presentation this evening. First of all, in thinking about an overview, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights I think can be broken up into several sections thematically. Articles 1 to 5 seem to deal with the equality and the full humanity of every person. Articles 6 to 12 look at equal protection of all humans under law, rather than arbitrary treatment. I think that's important to understand legal bases for operation as opposed to people going around the law or having capricious type of control or hegemony in any particular culture. Articles 13 to 15 emphasize the rights of all persons to be members of a nation and to travel internationally. Now, we take those kinds of things for granted, but even the capacity to be a part of a group or a nation and then to go between nations involves a particular set of human rights. Articles 16 to 20 emphasize the rights of all persons to enjoy freedoms of family life, property, thought, conscience, religion, expression, and assembly. Now, you can appreciate some American aspects in terms of the American Bill of Rights and Constitution, but these are not just partial to America. They ought to be universal human rights. Articles 21 to 23 emphasize the rights of all to participate in governance, in work, equal pay, and social benefits from one's labors. Then Articles 24 to 30 emphasize social rights to all of the basic standards of living, education, community, and international order. When Eleanor Roosevelt led a group of different countries, different religions, to come up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1946, 47, and 48, you can appreciate that she was drawing and others were drawing from different faith traditions as they relate to these basic commitments. Well, from a Christian perspective, you can see how these aspects are central to the nonviolent teachings and example of Jesus. Part of what I passed out is a handout. One of the outlines that I use in my class, the biblical basis for peacemaking. And part of what we see there is that Jesus, regarding the law in Hebrew Scripture, emphasizes the precepts of God and how to understand what God is doing. One of the things that Jesus does then is to aim at the center of the law. You have heard it said, do not kill. I say unto you, do not be angry with the other. Jesus is getting at the heart of the law. In that sense, he shows a radicality of teaching. Jesus also emphasizes living with authenticity before God and integrity with one another. You can see also in Jesus' own ministry that he embraces the afflicted. He heals lepers and the ill, those who are marginalized from society. He welcomes. He liberates the inwardly afflicted in his exorcism work, and he dines with sinners and Pharisees. I think it's important to realize it's those who are regarded as sinners that he welcomes around the table, and in that sense, he includes them. Well, these 10 points on Jesus' teachings on peace, what I want to say, offer an ethic for every Christian. So part of my concern is to convert Christians to Jesus. I think that if we could get Christians to follow Jesus, it'd be a lot better world.
Amen.
One of the things, thank you, Ralph Beebe. Ralph has written on this topic. One of his books that I like the most is called Waging Peace. And there he will argue some of these precepts in really compelling ways. We don't have time to go into this, but part of what you see with Augustine and with the Roman Christian developments is the development of just war theory and how to legitimate war in particular situations. Eastern Christianity, though, among the Orthodox, the 14 Orthodox traditions, didn't really go that direction. They maintained a peace testimony and calling for the loving of enemy and forgiveness of others as opposed to legitimating violence. Well, Jesus' teachings, the love of God and also the love of neighbor, two great teachings in Hebrew Scripture. In that sense, the dual priority as a way of fulfilling the Ten Commandments. Jesus teaches people to love even their enemies, calls for people to turn the other cheek, and calls for people to love Gentiles and tax gatherers and others. I'll say more about this a little bit later, but he calls for people to renounce vengeance and to live by a third way, turning the other cheek, going the second mile, offering one's undergarments if asked for one's cloak. Part of what he's doing here is bringing up a new way of being, creating a third alternative to a fight or flight leverage system of domination. I think we could learn about this approach, and we certainly need to think about that creatively today and in other generations. Another point is that Jesus teaches that our kingdom is other. The reign of God is never limited to outward platforms or to socioeconomic groups. Rather, the kingdom of God is not of this world, and that is why his disciples cannot fight physically to further it. It's not a matter of it may not happen, it's a matter of it cannot happen. God's reign can never be furthered by violence. It can never be furthered by untruth. To take up such measures is actually to set back the kingdom and the reign of God. So God's kingdom cannot be furthered by departing from the way of God's kingdom. I think this is central to Jesus' teaching. Another element worth thinking about is that Jesus calls people to servanthood, not domination. So Jesus teaches that the first will be last, the last will be first, and therefore he turns things upside down. The Gentiles may lord it over others, but that is not to be so among Jesus' followers. The one wishing to be first must be the servant of all. And in that sense, he teaches us a new way to understand leadership. Jesus also tells his disciples to put away the sword. Those who wish to live by the sword will also die by it. He's not prescribing the latter. He's warning people in a wisdom-oriented way. In that sense, peaceable ends require peaceable means, lest the ends be compromised by the contradictory means. Jesus says, "Forgive, do not avenge. If you have aught against any, forgive." So he commands his followers to forgive even the undeserving. 7 times 70, or 77 times. In other words, one is to be forgiving on an infinite level, as opposed to refusing to run the risk of letting someone off. Likewise, as we forgive others, so shall we be forgiven. So beware. We're invited into that gracious space of being forgiving persons. Jesus then invites his followers to embrace the cross. To stand in the truth is to be willing to suffer for the truth. One who wishes to save one's life will lose it. Only as one is willing to release one's life can one hope to find it. Following Jesus might not protect one from persecution. It might even provoke persecution. The words of the 19-year-old Quaker martyr, James Parnell, come to mind here. He says, "Be willing that self shall suffer for truth, and not the truth for self." Then Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers. They shall be called the children of the Most High." To pursue peaceable goals by peaceable means distinguishes the workings of God from the doings of the world. Therefore, pursuing peace with all is the way of holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, according to Hebrews 12. Then Jesus says, "Peace I give you, not of this world." And Jesus, therefore, invites us to embrace his peace, an unworldly peace, bolstered, not as the world gives, bolstered by symbols of security, but inward peace that overcomes the world. That comes by the Holy Spirit and he invites us to walk in that path. So these are Jesus' teachings on peace, and they're really pretty clear. Jesus invites his followers to embrace nonviolence and to therefore be forgiving as opposed to vengeful in all of our dealings. I think that therefore this is central to what it means to follow Jesus. And I wrote a book on this a year and a half ago, which looks at radical discipleship from a Quaker perspective, seeing it as a dynamic reality as opposed to a platform or an organizational approach. Well, thinking about Jesus, though, how about the context of the first of the first century? As a New Testament scholar, I have to think in terms of context. And so if you appreciate what was happening under Roman occupation and the ways that the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and then destroyed people throughout the entire region, you have 1,000 people who escaped the onslaught of Jerusalem, but they escaped up to Masada, where they committed mass suicide, lest they be taken by the Romans. Well, from Masada, you can see even to this day, the walls around the Roman camps. There are about 5 of these camps around the city. You remember the Peter O'Toole movie that came out maybe about 3 decades ago that was aired on television to show the narrative. Well, this is actually the ramp that the Romans built with Jewish slave labor. Here's the breach of the wall that they finally broke in. Up on Masada, they threw rocks down below, trying to retard the Roman advance. Again, a bit of leverage given gravity. And just looking down below, look at all those rocks. I mean, huge number of rocks. And, each of those probably was thrown down from down below. You have then the breach happening here, and the final act, you have 10 pieces of pottery which were chosen, and the 10 people, the 10 leaders killed groups from their sectors of the community, and then the last one killed the others before killing himself. Well, Jesus grew up near Sepphoris, a Roman city, not far from Nazareth, his hometown. Some amazing archaeological work is being done there. Here is a beautiful mosaic there in Sepphoris. When you think of the question, how do we change the world? When you have Roman occupation, asserting force, one of the issues is to try to get people to submit to Roman occupation. So when Jesus says, turn the other cheek, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn also the other, this is not saying be a doormat, be passive. Rather, if exchange was done with the right hand, to turn the other cheek, if one is stricken on the right cheek, is therefore to be willing to take a forehand. So to be stricken on the right cheek with the right hand is actually to receive a backhanded slap. So the function of a backhanded slap is to threaten someone and to threaten a right hand blow. And so when Jesus says turn the other cheek, it's to stand up straight, refuse to cower, and to call the other person to account. If someone asks for a garment, give him a coat or a shirt off your back. Again, a creditor trying to force a payment, might exact a coat. And so the point here is to go naked and to expose a system of harsh crediting. So give him, therefore, your undergarments. If someone asks you to go with him 1 mile, go with him a 2nd mile. In other words, if a Roman soldier would say, carry my pack, at least for 1 mile, which was the law, well, carry it a second mile. And in doing so, you expose the injustice of a harsh system. So what Jesus is doing is inviting people to choose creative means of exposing harsh methods of treatment. Well, the Apostle Paul, he sees the mission of taking the gospel to the Gentiles as reconciling Jews and Gentiles, taking the promise of Abraham and extending it to all who might believe and receive God's grace through faith. So seeing God's grace as available to all becomes a way of reconciling people groups in a universalizing approach. Romans 13, rather than seeing it as instituting the divine right of kings, really is inviting people to forgive instead of exacting revenge. That out of loving and forgiving treatment of the other, heaping coals of fire on the heads of the other would be a way of appealing to conscience. Likewise, the one law is to love one another. So in Paul's view, there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither bond nor free, male nor female. All are one in Christ Jesus. Then God's reign, therefore, is to call for God's love for all people and to live in that reality. So that's the question. How do we love others as God has loved us? It's a way of seeing others as they are, children of God, created in the divine image, and therefore loving others as God has loved us. As Jesus says, as much as you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. And these are bases then, these form bases for human rights, seeing every person as beloved of God, as the calling of every Christian. Thank you.
Laid a good foundation for me. Well, thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Dr. Anderson. You have laid a good foundation for me to begin here. I will not go into explaining all the articles of the Declaration, but I will just build on what you have already said, a good foundation. Thank you. I will tell you a little story here. About 2 years ago, when we were planning our last year's event, I was talking to a professor at a local university, and the professor teaches human rights and international law. And after a very long conversation, and he agreed to work with us, he made a comment to me saying that your religion, Islam, is incompatible with human rights. And I said, how do you define human rights? And he said, well, they are defined very well in the UN Declaration of 1948. And I said to him, I said, if I were to tell you that the UN Declaration of Human Rights is embedded in my faith, he was very quick to invite me to his class and talk to his graduate students, which I accepted. So that's why I framed the question here. What is the foundation of human rights in Islam? And the reference to human rights is the UN Declaration of 1948 that Professor Anderson summarized very well, the different articles and so forth. So I will describe that in the context of the fundamental Islamic teachings, which are contained in the scripture, the Quran, and which are also set as examples by the Prophet during his lifetime. And then towards the end, I will try and cross-reference each of the UN Declaration with the scripture. So the basic Islamic teachings are known as the 5 pillars. The first one is affirmation. And that's a very simple statement that there's only one God and Muhammad is his messenger. A very profound one indeed, because this is the basis on which the faith is built on. So essentially, it's a commitment that one makes and follows through. The second level, the second pillar, are the 5 obligatory prayers, which are another tool to inculcate discipline, schedule in our lives, and cleanliness. And just as a side comment, I would like to say that in these obligatory prayers, or other prayers as well, Muslims pray for the descendants of Abraham. So that means Muslims pray for all the Jews and for all the Christians, and so they are part of the Semitic family. The third pillar of Islam is fasting, which builds on this discipline where Muslims give up the lawful things, food and stuff, for the whole month from sunrise to sunset. And in this situation, one also feels for the dispossessed and the hungry. And there's a sense of humility that, overcomes the person. And so they are not only supposed to desist from eating, but also desist from all the bad habits like backbiting, slandering, lying, theft, all the other things. And just thinking of it differently, if each individual Muslim decides to give up one of the vices every year, then over the lifetime, 50, 60 years, that person would certainly enhance in their personality and be a good person. The fourth pillar is charity, and a 2.5% levy on wealth. This is an oversimplified statement here, because there are different rates for different types of wealth, or for crops and farming and stuff, but traditionally a 2.5% levy on wealth. This has to go to helping the poor and the needy. And as you can see, it is elevating from a simple affirmation to a routine, more stringent routine, and now helping out people from your savings and your wealth. And the last one is the pilgrimage to Mecca once in the lifetime, at least once in the lifetime, if the person can fulfill all their obligations, and that means financial obligations towards the family, towards community, towards friends, and so forth. And this brings in a sense of unity. People from all over the world come together. They're all dressed the same. They all perform the same rituals, and there's no distinction between rich and poor, black or white, and so forth. So these are the 5 pillars of Islam, and these are supplemented by the articles of faith, which very simply are belief in one God, belief in all the angels, and the angels that the Muslims believe in are the same as biblical angels described in the Bible, in all prophets. And the Muslims believe that there are innumerable prophets, and the number 124,000 is just an indication of the vastness of the prophets. And prophets have been sent to all people over time. And the 4th article of faith is belief in all revealed books. Now, this is a particularly significant article because it authenticates all previously revealed religions. And I think this is unique to the Muslim faith because no other faith acknowledges what has been revealed before them. And there are 5 books named in the Quran, but then there are other books that may have come before this. The 5th article of faith is predestination. Essentially, it means that people will be born and they'll die. And what they do in between during the lifetime, they have to use the gray matter in the head. And the last one is life after death, and the same concept of hell and heaven as we see in other Semitic faiths. Now, the important thing to notice here is the absence of Sharia, jihad, apostasy, and blasphemy. These are the things that we hear about and read about in the press, and these are the ones that lie as a foundation for all the violence that we hear about and read about. So the absence of these things are not part of the faith or the pillars, but they have become somehow assumed a disproportionate amount of importance in the community. Now let me talk about some of the Quranic affirmations. The principle of the Quranic teachings is freedom, justice, and equality. It promotes equity and discourages inequity, and that is mentioned in this chapter 3, verse 111 of the Quran. The Prophet's function is defined as the creation and strengthening of faith through divine signs, not enforcement, not coercion, but through arguments, logical arguments, moral and physical uplift of the people, furnishing guidance and expounding the philosophy underlying the law. The Quran does not prescribe details. It gives out broad principles to safeguard against rigidity. And it says that seeking divine guidance for every small detail will make the religion rigid and inelastic and burdensome. So it encourages the development of details according to the prescribed standards in consonance with the framework through mutual consultation. And it very clearly states there should be no compulsion in religion, and when you judge between people, judge with justice, and when you offer evidence, be honest, and even if it goes against you, should not withhold that evidence. And then, and then not let people's enmity incite you to act with injustice. And the last slide I'm going to show you about the affirmations is that the Quran acknowledges the diversity of race, religion, and wealth among the people, and refers to that as signs of God. And it talks about the reason that people are divided into tribes and nations, so that they can be identified as belonging to a certain tribe, but none of the membership in the tribe or citizenship gives them any privilege over other people. The true source of honor in the sight of God is the righteous life. Now, moving on to citing some examples of the Prophet to highlight the human rights approach in his teachings, I just listed 4 things. One is the Constitution of Medina. When the Prophet was forced to migrate from his birthplace Mecca to a town called Medina, he went and established a system of governance. So I'll talk about that in some detail. Then he signed a peace treaty with the Meccans at a town called Hudaybiyah, which I will not go into much detail, but just say that he accepted the terms that were given to him to make peace, which were very unfavorable, and his companions advised him not to accept the terms, but he did accept them. And in the long term, they came out to be very beneficial. And then when he returned to Mecca in 630 AD, the town surrendered without a fight, and there was not one death due to war. And he forgave all the people who had persecuted him and his companions. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on the last sermon that he gave out to people, and that contains some of the very important points that will lead me into the human rights discussion. The Constitution of Medina that was adopted in 622 contained the essential ingredients of a civil law. The primary purpose was peaceful conflict resolution, and there was a collective responsibility for defense and societal peace for everyone. It gave equal rights to all citizens, regardless of their culture, religion, or ethnicity, and abolished blood feuds. Now, blood feuds was a big tradition in that culture, and it still is. And so these conflicts never stop. They go on for generations, but this was a way of putting an end to it. The main features of this constitution were that all the signatories, and they represented different tribes, different faiths, different cultures, people who had come to their city, were one community. And everybody was free to profess their own faith. They had to remain united. There had to be a joint defense. And the other important thing is bloodshed, murder, and violence was forbidden. And Medina was to be a sacred place, and people seeking protection or asylum were to be treated as citizens. Let me move on to the last sermon that was delivered in 632 AD, which is not too far in the past as the other Semitic faiths are. And essentially, it says that all men are equal. No one has any claim of superiority over another. And this is, again, reflecting what the Quran had said earlier. And the best person is the one who discharges his duty towards God and people. So it's not only God, but also towards the people. And the most honored among you in the sight of God is the most righteous amongst you. So these are very similar things to what we have heard from the rabbi and from the professor. And the life, property, and honor of every person is sacred. And to take a man's life or property or to attack his honor and is unjust and wrong. Again, very similar to what we've heard before. And then he said, talked about women's rights as well. And he said that people, it's true that you have certain rights with regards to the women, but they also have rights over you. And it classified women as a trust from God, or wives as trust from God, and as partners and helpers. So there's this sense of equality here. And then earlier, it does say that humans are created in the image of God, and as Professor Anderson very correctly highlighted that point, so I will not go into that. Now, the one question is, what is the purpose of religion? Is it just ritualistic things or something else? And the Quran describes the purpose of religion as being the transformation of human behavior. And it cites 3 stages of human behavior and relationships. At the lowest level of spiritual development, the instinctive stage, humans have to act in an absolutely just manner. And through the training of religion, the pillars and the articles of faith, one has to elevate their behavior to the moral state where we can differentiate between right and wrong, and also elevate our our relationship to a state of benevolence where we are willing to give more than what is due to that other individual. And then proceeding forward, move to the spiritual stage where the action would be overwhelming benevolence. And to cite an example here, I would say Mother Teresa was probably at that level, and I think we all know who she was. And there are many other examples, but it won't help us. That makes the point. So if you look at the Quranic affirmations and the Prophet's practices back in the 7th century and compare them to the Human Rights Declaration in the 20th century, there's a strong correlation. Now let me move on to the Human Rights Declaration that is the basis for our discussion today. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been cross-referenced by this author, Zafrullah Khan, in his book Islam and Human Rights. And he has cross-referenced each of the 30 articles of the Quran, of the Declaration to the Quran and the Prophet's sayings and Prophet's sayings and his practices, which are known as Hadith. And he calls this declaration as embodying the broadest consensus of contemporary civilization on the subject of human rights. the preamble of the Constitution, which has now the one thing is that this Constitution, this Human Rights Declaration, is a statement of ideals. It has no legal enforcement power, but something that we all aspire to get to. But then, as making it part of the faith, individuals take it upon themselves to fulfill it. And I won't read all the words here. I know I'm running short of time. The preamble can be cross-referenced to these sections, these verses of the Quran. And likewise, the Article 1 and 2, which are the free and equal and don't discriminate, these could be cross-referenced to all of these chapters and verses in the Quran and things in the Prophet's traditions. And likewise, Article 3 and 4 are cross-referenced to these verses and these traditions of the Prophet. And likewise, 5 and 6. So there's very strong correlation there. And 7 and 8 to these things. And I'm not going to dwell on this any longer. I think you got the point. So essentially, the Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, this is the book that does all the details, contains all the details and cross-references it, and links the 30 articles to the fundamental Muslim beliefs and practices. And so I think it worked very well with the timing, Dan. So just in concluding, I would go back to the story I told you earlier, that the human rights as defined in this UN Declaration are embedded in the Islamic scripture, the Quran, and the Prophet's examples exemplify them, and it's an integral part of the Muslim faith. And as I showed earlier, each article is cross-referenced to the scripture. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, friends. I'm so happy that you brought the light back to the room. Let be light. As a matter of fact, I get more inspiration when we see your beautiful faces and enlightened faces. That give me more joy and more inspiration to talk about those wonderful points that has brought here. The concept of human rights, friends, for me, as a pediatrician, is very dear. Because remember, the pediatrician has the duty to bring about a healthy children. Many times in practice happen that I have a premature baby, 2.5 pounds, that I have to put him in incubator, take care of the baby, and then care of the parents comes afterwards. A lot of effort that a human being, wonderful human like yourself, so beautiful, so complete, can be produced out of all effort. Why? Because this human being has a purpose to fulfill. This health of human being is for some reason to preserve human rights, to serve mankind, to be an element that can change this world. And I'm so happy that this Circle of Peace, these wonderful people that you saw organize this great gathering, taught about this very important aspect of life that is now, unfortunately, so badly violated. Our dear colleague talked about human rights. But also we should remember that this human right that has been really accepted by all the nations on 1948 in Paris, 10th of December, is for well-being of mankind, for betterness, for bring peace and unity, that is violating so badly. Example of that, we see it each day, each moment in the news that you are saying that. And I want to also address our dear students that kindly attended this meeting, because you are the one that defender of human rights would be. And this concept of this kind of seminar in a school and the curriculum that the school is there is make us all defender of human rights, if we all accepted this, that has been also confirmed by all religion, as you saw there. So education is very important for us, but education should have a result. It's not only academic education that we learn it and forget it. Each one of them becomes an element to preserve, to promote human rights as the circle of peace and doing that. I have provided some simple slide for you, explain the human right. Fortunately, many of my friends helped me a lot. They can talk about International Declaration of Human Rights. But I wish also to add to this presentation something about historically, what is human right? Human rights is inherited to all human beings. Very simply, we are equally entitled to it without any discrimination. Any human being comes with human rights without any discrimination. Whatever race, whatever nationality, whatever religion they have, whatever they have, they're a human right. Human. Human is noble, created by God to fulfill some purpose. You see, there's people from different background, different religion, different nationality, under one umbrella of peace and unity together. I want to say that probably you have heard about the tale of the Eloquent peasant. A historical 2,400 years ago, before Christ, that a peasant is a farmer, went to the court of Pharaoh and talked to him about his human right has been violated was people. And they say in history that he was so eloquent in his speech. Then they read the record of his old script. They found that the translator found it so eloquent that they call it the Tale of Eloquent Peasant. And this is probably the oldest document about observation and importance of human rights in the history. Of course, there are many activities taking place. I want to take you to this very important aspect that Cyrus the Great, he was a wonderful, wonderful emperor in Iran, conquered the world, but very peaceful, wonderful man. Probably a rabbi knows about him because his name has mentioned in the Bible, Old Testament, because he freed Jewish people when he conquered the Babylon, and then they really appreciated of this wonderful man. And then his resting place in Iran, in Shiraz, really people love it as they go for pilgrimage here because its peacefulness, his observation of human life. And this very important cylinder, they call it Cyrus cylinder, has discovered within, in the old type of writing script, he mentioned the importance of human rights. He told about himself that wherever he goes, he gives them the sovereignty for those countries he conquered, and give the freedom to the people, and respect the people that builder of the community, including Jewish people that they say that even he allowed them to temple in Jerusalem be rebuilt again. And this is, they call Persepolis, remain of those kingdom of this wonderful. Here it is, I announced that I will respect the tradition, customs, and religion of a nation of my empire, and never let any of my government and subordinates look down or insult them, and continue. And they say that in 1879, this cylinder was discovered by that gentleman, a diplomat, and archaeologist, Humzat Rassam. And this is in the very dear to United Nations now. They keep it there. Now I keep it in Museum in England, this one. That's probably the first chapter of human rights. Another very important thing that is dear by all nations, the description and this poem of this Persian poet, they call it Saadi. He say that the sons of Adam are limbs of each other. And that poem is the Bani Adam a'za yek digaran ke dar afanish yek goharan. He say that we are just like members of one body. We have heart, we have liver, we have kidney, we have lung. They work together so beautifully. Never lung stop to send oxygen to the heart. If you stop it, the heart will collapse, then also the lung will collapse. They all work together. So the whole feature of humanity, just like the body of mankind, that organ work together without any say that I'm superior, I'm better than you. The heart doesn't keep all the blood in itself because I am the heart, but send it immediately to all muscles, to all cells of the body. So this is a beautiful thing that I heard that this is also entrance gate of United Nations, this scriptures. Another thing that helped a lot by all religion, as my friend representative beautifully explained it, this golden rule. There's a commonality of our religion is there here. No differences. They don't really think about difference about religion, but think of commonality. All this golden rule. Look at the sign of Jewish religion, as a Christian, as Muslims, as Baha'is, all of them and all the tradition. They all say this is the sum of duty. Do not to other that which is done to thee would cause pain, and many others. If only this consider, this commonality about all religion of the world, we consider, friend, we have a better life. So these are wonderful things. If we look at that perfectly and fairly, without our egos, because our understanding of selfishness that we have, see the truth in all religion, all come from God. There is one God, one religion, one man. And Baha'i want to know what is Baha'i perspective about, because I am representing Baha'i faith here. This is writing of Baha'u'llah has said that God's purpose in sending his prophet unto men is twofold. The first is to liberate the children of men from the darkness of ignorance and guide them to the light of true understanding. The second is to ensure the peace and tranquility of mankind and provide all the means by which they can be established. It's exactly confirmation of what our friend said it before, but two aspects of love. One, education. The messenger of God, Moses, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, Baha'u'llah, they're all divine teachers. They come for training mankind according to those wonderful teaching. And then, friend, when I think of teaching of God or religion, please dissociate reality and essence of religion from what they are doing in the name of religion. Those dogmas, those trouble, those traditional things that cause so much trouble in the world, I say. You refer to one point that religious, cultural paradox. If it really, religion becomes free from those paradoxical or difficult kind of traditional thing, the difference, then believe me, we have a one reality. Though when I talk about religion, friend, make sure that I talk about essence of the reality of religion that brought in that time for that people, according to that environment, according to capacity of man at that time, and give it to them. And about, again, go back to Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I want to mention the lady, this wonderful lady friend. Don't forget. Because one of the most important elements for establishing human rights was a lady. And it's an honor for all your ladies are sitting here so beautifully. Because she was a chairperson of committee that wrote and presented to United Nations the Declaration of Human Rights, had 30 articles. Some of them brought for my friend here, you saw it here. And you see this her hand, that is in Spanish language, as a matter of fact. And this is Mrs. Roosevelt. that I think that President Truman called her the first lady of the world, not simply America, because of her wonderful work at that. So I believe that in the future, if the world become governed by ladies, we will have better world, most peaceful one. And I want to ask you, please work on that. You have capacity. This is a time of feminizing this world if you want peace. Leave it to the ladies to achieve it. The men has not been proving very peaceful. And I took the selected article from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because these are related to my country and persecution of Baha'is in Iran that you have heard about that. 1970, since this new government came and mixed religion with the politics. And they started to persecute Baha'is and other minorities, even Christian, Jewish, all of them, even Muslims has been persecuted by them. Because, again, it was not religion. They brought something political, something selfish, something totally not related to religion. There's a misunderstanding, misconception, misinterpretation of the writing of Holy Quran and the other religion. And these are all related that everyone has the right to own property. My property, friend, has been taken away from me. My office has been attacked. My home was attacked. And whatever I had took away, even my bank account, because I was a Baha'i, I was not, in their ways, a religious man. While you will see that the teaching of Baha'i faith is really confirmed, respect all religion. But it talks that God is divine, send this guide, divine God, every time the humanity is needed for that, according to time, according to capacity of people. Just Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, this time Baha'u'llah. And we believe that in the future also, God will never leave us alone. And this is article say that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, consciousness, religion. My religion has been denied in Iran. 200 of my doctors, my friend, was killed in Iran, my colleagues, because they were Baha'is. The dean of universities in Iran, many of them believe. And then I have to leave Iran because they attack my home, everything. I take my son to England for education. And then when I was there, again, persecution against Baha'i continues so intensely that they told me not to come back to Iran because you come back, they will kill you. So my wife and 2 other kids forced the love to come to England, and then I go to Trinidad and Tobago. They needed pediatrician. And those people, the middle of a Caribbean Sea, small island, 1.3 million population, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Baha'is were there. They opened their arms to me. They never look at me, who am I? They look at me as a person who has come to serve as a physician. And they respect my religion. 10,000 people in that small island are Baha'i, believe me. We have IRO, Intelligence Organization, Muslim, Christian, Hindus, Baha'is, were there. And that show that openness. How in my own country, because I am Baha'i, as a physician that's been grown there, they don't want me, but those people accept my thing. And this is the reason that some countries develop, progress, and some regress. Look at my country. They have destroyed my country. Okay, so I have to go fast. And this is United Nations, friend. You have seen about that. These are human rights. Not only has inspired a number of other human rights organizations. Mention some of them that it's not a human right alone by United Nations. These are all people. And these are extracted from 300 organizations in the world that they are working in, human rights organizations, in each country one. And I want to say that there are two twin processes at the work in the world. One destruction, one construction one. This integration or construction take place in the world. Look at Mr. Gandhi. Look at Mr. Martin Luther King, Mr. Bishop Tutu. These are all of the people that came, give their life, effort to establish peace in the world. Look, I like to say this. Mr. Gandhi said, an eye for an eye will make the world blind. Nobody can hurt me without my permission. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. How wonderful it is. And they say that be the change that you want to see in the world. So the purpose of this kind of gathering, I think that change me. I become defender of human rights, not to stay indifferent. We have to bring awareness to the whole world. And this is a beautiful description. The time is always right to do what is right. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin and his background and his religion. This is a man who was 27 years in prison, but he still came with the spirit of peacefulness. Mr. Mandela, Mr. Tutu, if you want peace, you don't talk to your friends, talk to your enemies. The same thing Jesus Christ probably has mentioned, or Prophet Muhammad said. And destruction was in the world, friend. Look at the World War I. They killed 47,000 were killed in World War I. And in World War II, 60,000 million. And so much destruction in the world. These are the sources exist in the world. But they say the Baha'i Faith perspective of the human right is one God, oneness of religion, oneness of man. There is one God, one religion, one man. All of this religion you see there, they are taking the light of God, and they are all one. So in the perspective of the Baha'i Faith, all religion are one. All come from one person. But they come in different ages according to the need of the time and the requirement of time. Just like a child go to class, in each class as a teacher. Baha'u'llah said the earth is but one country and mankind is citizen. If you are a member of one country, then why trouble? Why war? Why violence of human life? And they say that the well-being of mankind is peace and tranquility are unattainable unless and it is unity is firmly established. This is exactly what Baha'u'llah. 3 minutes, so. And then say the equal standard of human right. An equal standard of human right must be recognized and adopted in the estimation of God. All men are equal. This is why Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, 80 years before the Declaration of Human Rights was given by United Nations. And again, these are rights of people in Iran that has been violated. Women's right has been violated in Iran. They forced them to have veil. Kurdish ethnic cleansing taking place. Minority religious. Arab ethnic cleansing taking place in my country as example. It's not only Iran alone, many parts of the world, but I want to only show you some example. And these are the German sociologists, Ulrich, like they say that these are things taking place: slavery, human trafficking, illegal imprisonment, illegal treatment of refugees, trade in human organs, and so on and on and on, taking this world. And we are the one that we want to defend. This is stop in the world. It is not good for human being. We cannot call myself a human being if I do this kind of thing. And these are the defender of human rights, Mrs. Shirin Ebadi. She was a winner of Nobel Peace Prize. She defends Baha'is in Iran and said that they are innocent people. They accept all religion. Why they should be in prison? Why they kill them? They force them to leave Iran. Now she is leaving America. Thanks to America that give refugee. This gentleman and the lawyer that defend Baha'is, they put in prison. And the lawyer in defend prison because he was telling the truth. And this gentleman is Mr. Ahmad Shahid, United Nations representative that has been assigned by United Nations to go to Iran and tell Iranian, those government in Iran, that is not good to these innocent people. But they don't allow him to go to Iran. Many times he asked, United Nations appointed him, but they just couldn't. And friend, an example of what destruction taken against Baha'is. The right side picture is a picture of the most holy places for Baha'is. In Iran, the house of the Bab. They destroy it. This one is, you see that the clergy is destroying the dome of the one Baha'i temple in Tehran. And this is the cemetery of Baha'is that died. Even they killed. Two of my brothers were buried here. and they destroy it and change it to some kind what they like. And those people here, the leaders, I don't call them leaders, but the member of National Assembly, they kidnapped them and killed them. The second one, they killed them. This girl, lady girl, this one is 16-year-old age, without any fairness behind this girl, because she was teaching children, teaching some moral and spiritual education. And those are cemetery Baha'is has been destroyed. And this is exactly that document, instruction of leaders of the Iran that say that Baha'is, education will stop, and instruction there. And then education is not a crime. Campaign started recently all over the United States. And then wonderful people like you came and support them. And these are the leaders of Baha'i faith. They call it Yaran. They're in prison 20 years. They are all educated. They are wonderful, wonderful defender of human rights. Put him first 10 years in prison, then appeal go to 20 years of prison. And they're amazing, wonderful, well-wisher of country. And these are the teachers that teaching the Baha'i students, because they don't allow them to go to university. They say you write in your entrance letter that you're not Baha'i, other religion, the Muslim or the other. They say, no, I am Baha'i. I don't want to start my education with lie. So they don't allow them. And then these people started to voluntarily to teach them in their home, on their ground here or there. Then they also arrested them, and they are all in prison now. You see that the depth of ignorance, prejudice, and lack of understanding bring this kind of thing. And then this man was killed, very prominent person in Bandar Abbas. But despite all the calamities, friend, I want to say for 1 minute, allow me 1 minute.
I'm letting you have the rabbi's time.
Sure. 1 minute. Because despite all calamities, many wonderful, open-minded, fair-minded people, including the clergies, started to support Baha'is. He is a calligrapher. He writes the thing. He wrote in this thing that one of the verses of Baha'u'llah say that associate the followers all religion with the spirit of love, harmony, and peace. This is get it from Baha'i writings, send it to Universal House of Justice, the supreme institution of Baha'i faith. And then, of course, he was in trouble because he said it so. A lot of attack on him. And other people that started. This family, you see that the father and mother was in prison, and this child was kept in the house of grandmother to take care of him. And this man was wonderful, great filmmaker, speaker, writer. He went to the house of that grandmother, kissed the feet of this little child, and apologized to mother, and apologized that his government is doing this kind of thing. And you say, then they attack him this way, same man, but he stayed steadfast in his word. And again, you talk about Mr. Tutu, and that's on a president of the, yes, East Timor. He wrote, I don't want, the time is not there to allow me to put it there, but they started to support the right to Iranian that education is not a crime. Prevention of education is a crime. And this is your senator that he raised his voice in support of Baha'is. And American Parliament and many people, they started to support Baha'is and wrote to Iranian government. Why, in this time of 21st century, in the name of religion doing this thing? It's not real religion, it's not the thing that offend, but those things that man-made, selfish, egotism, prejudice thing that caused the situation. So let free religion from those man-made things. Look at the essence of that. Essence of that is love, understanding, peacefulness, and all the things that our friend explained so good. Thank you very much. Sorry for one.
I invite all our speakers to come up to our podium over here. And so what we're going to do is we have a mic over here right to your right. And so if all our speakers will have them sit down. And if you have any questions for any of our speakers, we have Rabbi Joseph Wolf, Dr. Paul Anderson, Arif Humayun, and also Dr. Feridun Rahimi. And so we have a bit of space for questions, and we'll limit the questions to questions and not comments, but the speakers will also be here afterwards, and so they will be able to answer in a bit more of a longer term conversation. So if you have any questions for our speakers for one or more, I will open this up to our community. Oh yeah, so we have a mic right over here.
I don't know if this is an important question, but what is predestination, Arif, in Islam? I saw it in one of your slides.
Well, predestination essentially means that humans and the whole system that we are in will go through a cycle of birth and death. And so humans are responsible for their actions at that time. And so if they do good deeds, then they get rewarded in the hereafter as well. And if they do bad deeds, then there's punishment for them. It's the system of justice, though.
One interesting thing that I discovered after being in Iraq and thinking that I was starting to understand the dynamics of Islam is to find out how many different sects there are of Islam. So I wonder if you could address that, and then if each of the rest of you would kind of touch upon how many sects or variations there might be of your faith.
I can do that, but I have to go to my slides to do that.
Perhaps while he's doing that, each of you could comment on the number of sects or versions of your faith.
There's only one version, it's mine. No, I mean, actually, honestly, in the Jewish world, we are largely post-denominational at this point. That is to say, liberal Jews, conservative Jews, we intermingle. Our ideas are cross-pollinating for the most part. Orthodox Jews, of course, still believe, or they operate under the idea that everything is commanded. And they, within a certain range, will say that like, they are commanded to do all of the commandments from Sinai, and that's up to them to explain how what they mean by that. But they will observe fully, as much as possible, very strictly, relative to everybody else. That's to say that it's a whole post-denominational world that is less concerned with doctrine and more concerned with creative, imaginative thinking and responses to teachings. And the other part of the world, the Orthodox part of the Jewish world, for the most part, that is concerned with a more literal version, which is about practice, not belief, but practice, that you have to do certain things at certain times. Okay?
Christianity, of course, a very large movement, over 2 billion Christians. The Roman Catholic Church is very broad and universal. You have different groups within the Roman Catholic Church, different orders, different groups. Eastern Catholicism, or Eastern Orthodoxy, would be about 250 million, maybe 1/3 billion. There are 14 different patriarchates around the world. That division happened in 1054 AD over a variety of things. With the Reformation in the 16th century, you have movement towards biblical Christianity. So you have the Reformers citing Scripture. Of course, in Germany, Lutheranism, then Reformed traditions. You have even the Church of England breaking away. It's kind of English Catholicism, Church of England.
You have then many denominations then emerging out of the use of Scripture, and probably more than we can number.
You know that Baha'i faith is a new religion, and all the elements that may cause division and sectarism has been eliminated by Baha'u'llah, by the founder of Baha'i faith. He appointed by his own writing, clearly his will of testament, his son Abdul Baha as his successor and his interpreter. He didn't allow any personal interpretation or leadership. At this stage, all the efforts of Baha'i faith take place by institution, elected by the people themselves through consultation, not confrontation. They take up efforts of Baha'i faith. So there is no division. Baha'i faith is one religion and remain one, because this way Baha'u'llah has appointed the son his own handwriting. There is no difference if somebody says that this is mean, or my interpretation is this, others say that my interpretation is this. One interpretation by his son, whatever he says, is obeyed by Baha'is all over the world. So no sect.
What is the population of the Baha'i members?
Population of Baha'i faith, according to statistics that we receive, around between 6 to 7 million at this stage throughout the world. Yes.
Very quickly, the number of sects in Islam is, some people say 72, 73, or few, 7 dozen, I would say. But how it came around is that the religion, the Prophet's lifetime is 610 to 632 AD, and then over time, as the Muslims went into other countries and other lands, they started Reformation movements that became regional, but then they became global. The Wahhabi movement was started in Saudi Arabia in about the 1700, 1800 period, and then then Salafi was started. These are the main groups in Egypt. The Al-Azhar University, they tried to interpret the details and so forth. Then India was another big one, and Deobandi in the same time period, 18th century. And then another one in India called Barelvi, and they were all different. They were only details of interpretation. The fundamentals were the same, but the culture took over and they became dominant sects within their regions. And then going on forward, this Al-Qaeda, Taliban, IS, and those things. So this is how they all came around. And they were trying to go back to the essence, but they missed somehow. And so these are the failed attempts that created all the divisions. That's a simple explanation.
Thank you.
So this is a question for either anyone or everyone, but I guess I was wondering like how you, or if you had advice about how to get other people to care about international issues, especially when like a lot of people don't feel like they're directly affected by it, maybe in America or, I don't know, majority populations. Yeah, if any of you have advice on just kind of like how you can get other people to care about that kind of thing.
I'll take that a little bit. I work with a bunch of, I work with a Jewish community that actually has a proactive sense of, an imaginative sense of engagement with the world. I find that as a spiritual leader, I'm always trying to take the words of my tradition, the texts, by the way, and the texts are not necessarily ideas, they're dynamic, right? The texts get read by readers. That's the Jewish tradition, it's the readers more than the text. So I'm trying to open up those texts to people who want to read and be imaginative and to discover that religion is not about the past, you know. Jewish ideas are about what's going on now. And they're dynamic. So to give you one idea, one example, about 20 of us, and this is weird for Jews, Christians go on missions. Jews don't go on missions. We don't know anything about missions. We just don't have that history. But about 20 of us went to Eastern Uganda. Now we went to Eastern Uganda not to discover what we could do for Eastern Ugandans. We went to Eastern Uganda to figure out who are we and what's our world about. I mean, we live in relative comfort here. I mean, in America, we live in an age of affluence. And the question is, what are these teachings that we're all learning, you know, in our different traditions? What are they saying to us? What are we supposed to be doing? How do we wake up from our complacency? How do we permit what's going on in terms of corporations deciding what goes on in our lives? How do we wake up and how do we attend to the words that we're all reading from our various traditions, powerful teachings? And so it's an engagement with text that's not about the past, it's about now and creating an interpretation that's in your lives, that's happening now. I think at George Fox, I think you get that language. I think you understand that. That's what it's about.
I think, Megan, the important thing is just to go, take the trip, get to know people. When a situation becomes humanized and of personal interest, then you cannot ignore it any further. And I think that we live in this social media age and information age. I mean, you just cannot ignore the realities that are happening around the world. So part of it is to care, to talk about it, go visit, you know, make acquaintances.
I'd just like to add to what my colleagues have said. Meeting people makes a big difference, and issues that we are faced with are global in nature, like security, for example. I travel a lot, and I'm equally as scared as anybody else would be to get on the airplane, but I have to travel. Global warming is another big global threat. We all face it. So we have to talk to each other. We have lived in silos historically, not talking to each, in the recent history, I mean, not talking to each other, and the political correctness puts us in a situation where we don't want to connect with other people. We just leave them alone and say, well, let them do what they are doing. But that is causing some issues, and we have to talk to each other and understand the issues, meet people, and then we will be able to do something about it.
I think to respond to your wonderful question, how we care and how we can make the other people care about this, we ask you to become involved. You are the one that should care. This is the reason that we have this kind of gathering. When we accept responsibility, human right, as a matter of fact, come with human responsibility. It's not only to know it, rather to act upon it. This is the reason that all education. Another way that we care is that through the effort of the same Circle of Peace, organize this kind of meeting, but organize it such a way that each one of us, when we leave this room, we have a plan for ourselves, how to act upon, how I can influence other friends, how I can bring the awareness to my neighbor, to my children. Baha'is are working hard with our own children from this age. Bring them up in such a way that they love mankind. They know that this world is one world. All humanity is one. The religion of God is one. Religion is for love and unity. Baha'u'llah said that if religion become cause of disunity, it's better not to have religion. Religion is a means to bring us together, not the ways to different us from each other. So we have children classes for our children, Baha'i children, all over the world, offered free to all mankind. In that children classes, we teach them to pray, to respect all religion, open to all the people, all races, without any discrimination, and say that you are a world citizen. And you have respect all races, all nations, all nationality, all creeds. So this is very important. In some part of the world, unfortunately, there are schools. They teach them to hate, to kill, to hate America, to kill foreigners. You know about the news. We want to do opposite, to bring more peace. We start with ourselves. Myself, we're not talking about that. I should be one of those. You should be one of them. And you are the builder of future. You should accept responsibility. The world will change.
Yeah. Yeah, we have time for one last question. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. I have to ask this question because in the beginning I asked all of you to ask a question. I couldn't go home without asking one. So this is a difficult one, and it's a pretty serious question in a sense, because all of the speakers quoted the UN Security Council, not the UN Security Council, the UN Human Rights clauses. And my question to all the panel is that, do they have any ideas how we can reform the United Nations, especially the United Nations Security Council? Because it's the implementation arm of the United Nations with 5 countries. It's represented for more than 5 countries, but with 5 countries having a veto power in that UN Security Council. How can you basically implement human rights in the present structure? It seems that you cannot. The UN has failed in implementing its own human rights. But do they have any ideas?
Well, that's outside of my field of expertise. I mean, I really don't know how to reform the UN. I can't do that. I can give you, if you permit me, I can give you a real specific example of where I think I'm challenged as a Jew with regard to human rights. And there's some light and positive hope. So you know, the Jewish people suffered genocide 75 years ago. It's called the Holocaust. I hope you studied about that so you know how to not let something like that happen again. And it happens. It's going on all the time. There are genocides in the world, and people persist in letting them go on. You know, the Jewish community understandably lives in the aftermath of that event, in the shadow of that event, and it affects our politics. And many Jews are concerned about the state of Israel, and I'm sure you hear about the Middle East conflict. And I think that's an important, is an important lesson in human rights with regard to Israel. I happen to be someone who loves my history and recognizes the need to have established the state of Israel as a very, very important place, a safe place for Jews. On the other hand, now that I understand my own history better and I understand what happened in the area and that there was another population there in Israel, the Palestinian Arabs, Palestinians, I work with Palestinians to try and overcome the erasure of culture that goes on by my own people, okay? And so rather than try to solve the problem of the United Nations, I'm not going to answer your question, I can't do it, but I want to cop to something, okay? Because I'm concerned about young people. I have a daughter who is extremely Jewishly connected and observant and practices her religion. But she's learned Arabic, and she spent 6 months on the other side of the separation fence or wall. It's really a wall in Ramallah, and I was explaining that earlier. And gee, she learned, no, not to her surprise, but to the surprise of many around in the community, that there's another narrative, that there are other great people on the other side of the wall. And what am I trying to illustrate? I'm trying to illustrate the principle that until you actually put yourself in a position of meeting people with a different narrative, a different claim to the same place, the same world, you're not doing human rights. So I can't solve the problem at the highest echelons outside of my range of expertise, but I can tell you that it's cathartic and it's unbelievably holy to embrace the other narrative. Not to let up your own, but to embrace the other narrative and to do it lovingly in a search for truth.
Thanks, Joseph. Elizabeth Todd, who taught at George Fox, is at Ramallah, at the Ramallah Friends School. Sam Saxton from Newburgh is at Ramallah. Go there. Thinking about our daughters, I think I'd have to ask my daughter Della what she would do about this. After she graduated from George Fox a year and a half ago, she went to the Quaker United Nations office. And their policy is to have a lot of tea with people, to get together outside of official venues. So I would say have a lot of tea with people, get people talking together. People are not the problem is the problem. Get people working together on the problem, therefore we're on the same side, dealing with the problem. So just that kind of an approach as opposed to alienation. So help conversation happen, help common interests happen, humanize the issues, help people understand the narratives and the multiplicity of narratives. One thing that I might push for is a three-state solution, and just get that going now. When Della and I were over in Israel 4 years ago at a conference by Galilee College up near Nazareth on 3 religions, 2 states, and we just heard presentations from everybody, from all different perspectives. Seemed to me that there was a window of working with the West Bank Palestinians and Israel, that there's things seem to be pretty close to just making a deal. Let's go, let's go with a 2-state solution, and not to wait for Gaza to be on board. Get something fixed now with the West Bank, and then invite Gaza to come along as soon as they're ready. I think that's one thing that could move things ahead.
In addition to agreeing with both of my colleagues here that communications and understanding is a way to go.
A little bit off script,
if I understand your question
that we had before they started,
how would United Nations enforce the human rights? Well, I think UN has done a great job in defining the ideal, and each individual country, it's up to them to try to aspire and bring those ideals into the legislation so that they can be implemented, because UN cannot implement laws in other countries. They can only advise them and define the standards. And as Dr. Rahimi showed, the degree of persecution happening in Iran, it's the Iranian government that is a tool, that is a party to that persecution. So how can an outside force go and tell them to do otherwise? They would not even let the UN representative enter the country. And the same thing is true for other countries in the world. So it's our responsibility as individual citizens and the governments of the country to take the ideal, which is a sense of the global conscience that we have listed in 30 articles. It's for them to do that, not the UN. I don't think that's the right way to go.
In response to your question, how to reform United Nations from our religious views, I want to give you good news that at the beginning of Declaration of Human Rights, approval of that, the Mrs. Roosevelt consulted a lot with Baha'i Committee of United States. And many of those items inspired by the consultation and by Baha'i writings that you saw it exactly compatible with that. First, at the same time, International Baha'i Committee wrote to United Nations about reform or improvement or enhancement of human rights declaration. This matter of human right and human responsibility for the first time given by International Baha'i Committee. Not only we have a right, but we have responsibility. This matter was emphasized strongly by them. And then in 50 years of anniversary of United Nations, 50 years after United Nations, they wrote another declaration, another letter to them, asking about this, the right of veto. This is not fair to the rest of the world. They say that how we can really eliminate that. That every country equally be, his right will be preserved. This is another point that to point it out to United Nations. But remember that anything that we ask the world to do, we are responsible to start on this. To reform United Nations, we have to reform the human being, a better human being. The person that really is sitting there, representing the country, is a fair person. Not just a representative of my country when they say that no Baha'is are doing this and we don't kill any Baha'i, well, all the world knows that they have killed them. So how we are a truthful human being? In anything in the world we want to achieve, Three participating is very important: individual, community, and institution. Individual, I should start from myself to be a better, fair-minded person, to observe and regard and respect his human life. And also, community at large, the form from individual, become oriented this way. And then institution of the country, means religious leaders. They have a great role to play in peacefulness and reformation if needed. Leaders of the world, political leaders of the world. We have some trouble with all of these areas. So all should work together and reform ourselves, then United Nations simultaneously would reform. Three participants.
I'm going to have to draw us to a close here. I just would like to just thank all our panellists tonight. So maybe we'll give them a final round. I think our final question has kind of been a symbol of really where we're going with this, that it's so important to talk. And I think what we've been doing tonight and listen to other people's stories and perspectives, to the other narratives is so important. But then also it illustrates how much more we have to talk about. So there's so many more questions, there's so many more things to do. So thank you so much for being a part of this evening. If you have specific questions, our panellists will be around just for a little bit. And if you want to grab a little snack on your way out, I know my students will. Do it. Okay, have a lovely evening. Thank you.